This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience.
Welcome to the G-Spot Podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silkhouse, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us for conversations around sex, spirit, and all things self-care. All things self-care. All things self-care.
This is a journey into sound.
You are a G-Spot Podcast with Katie.
Hello, dear listeners. Katie here, coming to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, and it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas in my house because I've set up my tree and it's covered in balls and icicles, and me and my man, we actually covered my tree this year in living roses, and it is so beautiful. I suggest covering your tree in natural things. Just a little hot Ayurveda tip for your morning or your afternoon or your night or wherever it is that we're finding you. I am so excited to talk about this topic today because, you guys, it is so near and dear to my heart, and just talking about it and just thinking about what I'm going to talk about today just really opens up my heart and floods me with a sense of compassion because OMG for reals, anxiety, y'all. Like, anxiety, y'all, it is real. You know, and I think about how much I've really, really suffered and how hard it is to live with anxiety and depression. And I'm flooded with compassion, right? Because it's tough. And I'm also flooded with joy because I get to speak about it to you. And when we speak about things and when we name them, we take away their power over us. And there's so much toxic shame surrounding anxiety and depression and mental disorders and imbalances and mental health issues. And we think about these things as something that we want to hide or that we need to be ashamed of, especially if you're like me and you're a type A gal and you're used to taking care of everybody else and you're used to making really big, long to-do lists and totally kicking ass in the world. And I know that's a lot of you. And some of you, it's not. You're not a type A and you still struggle with anxiety and depression. And I really have been thinking a lot about this podcast. And by the way, I'm doing a podcast on it right now with you, and you're going to get a lot out of it. I think, I hope, I pray. But we are also next month in Lineage of Love for the month of January. We are dedicating the whole month of Lineage of Love to this topic. And so if you're new to the podcast, get your hot booty in the Lineage of Love. And I'll have more info about that at the end of the talk. But I'm so just really, really wholeheartedly convinced that this is what I need to be talking about today and this year, not only in this podcast and in Lineage of Love, but we go into it in depth in Ayurveda school because it is so, so powerful. And it is the malaise of the people. Anxiety is the number one most often diagnosed mental emotional imbalance in the world today. And it used to be depression, and anxiety is beating depression now, which, in some senses, Ayurvedically speaking, is a good thing. And we'll talk about that, why. So anxiety is the number one most often diagnosed condition in terms of mental emotional imbalances. And some people legitimately have, an anxiety disorder. And I am no stranger to that. And so if you're out there listening, no shame. I was diagnosed as having an anxiety disorder when I was a teenager and definitely in my 20s. And now I'm probably one of those people on the spectrum. Anxiety is like my old friend, and she tends to rise up when I least need her to rise up. But I'm no longer walking around paralyzed by it the way I used to be. So I want to start off this talk by saying you are not alone. You are not weird. You are not messed up, and you are not diseased. Most people in our world today live with some level of anxiety. And so just rest in that for a second. You are not alone. Anxiety is the number one affliction. One of my favorite teachers is a Buddhist tantrika heart-based teacher named Tara Brach. And she says that we are living in a PTSD culture. It's no longer that we have all experienced some sort of overt trauma, although many of us have. It's just this micro existence of PTSD. And how does that happen? Well, it happens when we live in a society that is dominated by a toxic, patriarchal, military, aggressive dynamic and culture that all of us were raised in, whether we had great parents or not so great parents. All of us were raised in this culture. And then the culture has a way of infecting, I like that word, infecting our caregivers. And so mom and dad then start to pass down this lineage of anxiety and everything that goes along with that into their children. And so we can think back on their parents and their parents and their parents, and we inherit this sort of fight or flight brain pattern that many of us get caught in. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in terms of how we get caught and what's going on. But you may be thinking, well, okay, but like, why, if that's true, is it so much worse now than it was for like my grandparents? Or why is mental health and anxiety and depression like such a big deal now? And the answer is that, well, there can be a number of lenses through which we can look at it. But one of the reasons is the speed at which we live life these days, and the speed at which our brains and our nervous systems and our bodies are accessing information is just 100,000 times more what our relatives experience. And so every single thing, according to Ayurveda, that you experience, everything you see on the internet, every time you scroll through your feed, every image and word has to be digested by our mind, body, nervous system. And so it's just a case of psychic constipation that's speeding up our nervous system and making fear and anxiety all the more worse. And so the good news about that is that we can also speed up the rate in which we develop spiritually and emotionally because of it being a quickening, right? We live in the Kali Yuga, it is said, this time of a quickening. And the quickening means everything's sped up. And I just feel that way sometimes. It just feels like things are going fast, and they're going fast in not a great way, but they're also going fast in a really, really good way in terms of how we're all connected and we're all being asked to dive deep into our lineage karma. And we talked about that in last week's podcast. But the side effect of the quickening, which, by the way, is a term from, we use it when we're speaking about babies in the womb, and when the fetus starts to show signs of life, it's called a quickening. And so we don't have to think about it as such a negative, only a negative thing. It's also this really potent time for personal growth and transformation and societal and cultural shift and change and paradigm shift. Yay. But the side effect of that quickening spiritually and sociologically and culturally is anxiety and fear. Particularly when we live in a culture, also there are many people who are not looking at their issues and who are kind of reverting back into tribalism. We see this in our political world. Um, building walls and making other people our enemy. Other people are coming for your jobs, and other people are rapists and murderers, and other groups are bad. And when that happens, the brain, the nervous system, reverts back to the limbic brain. And you get this sort of tribal first chakra, me and mine, my tribe, not you. And that is an unconscious nervous system program. And so we'll go into that a little bit more. But first, I just want to talk about like, what is anxiety and what makes anxiety different from fear? Tara Brach speaks about this as fear being this sort of present moment gripping or preparing for a real or a perceived threat. And so that's a good thing. If there's a snake coming to you, you need to run. If there's a bear coming at you, you need to jump. If there's a guy coming at you with a knife, you need to fight or flight. Like fear is a good, natural, healthy nervous system response. The problem that happens is when this thing becomes fear reaction to a perceived threat that is not real. And so many of us are living in a state of fear for perceived threats that actually aren't in the room, right? Like, so I always tell myself and my students, like, what is actually happening right now? Because what is actually happening right now is absolutely wonderful, easeful, peaceful, beautiful, warm, cozy, most of the time, right? Like most of the time, there is nothing to be afraid of. And so we can get caught in this fear spiral. And then that fear spiral can lead to an anxiety spiral, which is even worse because it's more subtle and it's more pervasive, and it becomes this sort of wallpaper upon which our life we live. And anxiety is different from fear. Anxiety is a state where we live in this sort of vague, nebulous anticipation of a threat in the future. Do you see the difference? Fear is like, oh shit, something bad is happening right now. And that may be true, and it may be not true. But anxiety is, oh my God, something of course bad is going to happen in the future. And it also is not reflective of actual reality. So just so we get clear on that, fear is healthy when it's the correct perception to an actual threat or a perceived threat that could come true. When it's not helpful is when there is no actual threat. Anxiety is different from fear. Anxiety is this nebulous, sort of vague sense of some anticipated, fictitious, created future reality that probably is not ever going to happen. And I'm laughing because so many of us know what I'm talking about, right? And this is you in the vast space of your mind creating stories about some possible reality to come. Mark Twain is so funny. He says the worst things that have ever happened to me in my life were oftentimes things that never happened. And that's just so true for us, right? We live in this state of anxiety about what could happen. And what the tantrics say about this is that unfortunate looping has got to be stopped. Why? Because from a tantric perspective, we create our reality with our thought forms. We create our reality because our thought forms create a change in our body and our emotions and the biochemistry of our body. And then the biochemistry of our body and our emotions creates a fertile ground through which we will birth more thoughts about what we're afraid of and what we are anxious about. And so do you guys see that ludic loop of my thoughts about what could happen in the future create a physical change in my structure. And that physical change in my structure can create a habit or a pattern of my body and my biochemistry. And that body and that biochemistry and that anatomical structure starts to create a fertile ground through which I am very, very much likely to have a neurological thought form that is going to reinforce that same ludic looping. And so this is what the Buddhists and the Tantrics called samsara, this wheel of perpetuation. Freud called it repetition compulsion, this compulsion to repeat what I was doing the day before. Some scientists say we have 86,000 thoughts per day. And we are highly likely, they say, to have those same 86,000 the next day. The spirit mystics said this is the definition of being caught in samsara, the wheel of repetition. And it's a subtle or very, very overt at times form of hell, right? It's a form of imprisonment. So, I want to talk about how to get out of this prison, and it is a hell that I know in my own mind and body very, very well. As you guys know, if you've read my book or you listen to the podcast, you know, anxiety, way more than depression, has been my little personal prison. And what I also just want to pause and give room for is just me sharing that with you. And that not taking away one iota from the worthiness and the validity of me in this world as a teacher and an expert in some senses in the realm of Ayurveda and Tantra, and my worthiness to be able to hold space for other people and share it. And I say that because there is such a ridiculous expectation in the spirituality world, in the wellness world, in the psychotherapy world, in the world in general, that if you are showing up to serve, then you better damn well be perfect yourself. And that is not the way I have ever seen it really work. And what I have seen really, really be the pattern is that the very thing that you struggle with the most, the teachings that you promote the most, the book that you write, is the thing that you most desperately need and have needed. And it makes you all the more equipped to be able to speak from this authentic place of having been to that hell and back, and sometimes even revisit it. So I just want to break this ridiculous notion that we need to be perfect in order to be good teachers or yoga teachers or psychotherapists or social workers or whatever you are, right? Interior designers, artists, break that right now. Because it is that thinking, that perfectionist thinking, that got me into a lot of trouble, especially a couple years ago when I had what I call my nervous breakthrough. When I realized that I was living in a male-dominated industry, which is the yoga world, by the way. If you think that the yoga world is dominated by women, you're wrong. Just because most people doing yoga are women doesn't mean we aren't still in an inheritance of a male-dominated patriarchal way of thinking that's very harmful. And that mode of thinking that I was raised in said that if I am further along down the spiritual path, and you can apply this to yourself, maybe if you're further along down the academic path, down the career path, down the wellness path, if I'm further along down the spiritual path, I should have less anxiety and fear. In other words, I should be getting more and more perfect mentally and emotionally. And what that does is it actually reinforces and perpetuates the anxiety-dominated mode of thinking. There's a beautiful Zen teacher who said, what would it feel like if you no longer had any anxiety about having anxiety? What would it feel like if you had no anxiety about your own imperfections? And so we have to start from that place. We start from that place of anxiety is perpetuated by you wanting to get rid of it. Anxiety is perpetuated by you wanting to be free from it and in a way perfected. So take a moment to kind of let that sink in. So what does anxiety look like and feel like? And I think this is also an important way that we can get unhooked. We have to actually watch the way that we label anxiety in the body. What we are now understanding is that sensations in the body, what I might label as the sensation in the body of anxiety, you might label as excitement. What I might label as anxiety, you might label as sadness. And so when you begin to actually question what anxiety even is in your body, you start to become free from it. But I would say that most people label anxiety as a feeling of tension, constriction, nervousness, a sense of dread. They would label that as anxiety, the sense that my body is contracting or constricting, that there's this sense of what I would label tension. And we're going to deconstruct that more in the Lineage of Love in January. And so if you want to know more about, okay, like I really want to understand more about this labeling anxiety in the body and how it can become free from that, we're going to go deeply into that next month in Lineage of Love, and we explore it even deeper in Ayurveda school. And both of those things are in January. So get your booty in there. But for now, we can just talk about the things that we label as anxiety is typically when we're just dreading things or focusing on what's going to go wrong or hyper analyzing small events in our life over and over. I don't know if any of you guys ever overthink situations. Anxiety often causes us to feel spaced out and just like this sense that, you know, something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And what that leads to is, well, lots of different things for different people, but we can project this sense of negativity out into the world. And so that's where we can get really stuck in anxiety when we start to go into that ludic looping of thoughts leading to feelings and those feelings being in the body and then the body leading to more thoughts. And so how do we really go beyond this? Oftentimes, if you ask doctors or wellness practitioners, a lot of doctors these days, they would say, you know, it's all in your head and you should really, you know, de-stress or do some yoga or meditate. And I get kind of pissed off when I hear that, because those of you out there, listeners, dear listeners, know that some of you have really done that. You've done the yoga, you've done the meditation, you've taken the bubble bath, you've changed your life, you go to bed early, and yet anxiety might really still be a big prison place for you, a way of getting caught. And not all meditations are created equal. And so if you have anxiety really bad, meditation can actually make it worse and exacerbate it. And so in Ayurveda school, we talk about different forms of meditation. And we talk about these different doshas, these different mind-body types. And Vata, which is the energy of air and ether, is the energy in imbalance of anxiety. And what does that mean? If you're new to Ayurveda, what that means is, from an Ayurvedic medicine perspective, anxiety has a way of bringing in energy that is cold and dry and quick and brittle into the body. But if we're cold and dry and brittle in the body, and if we're eating the wrong foods for our mind-body type, and if we're living a lifestyle that's too fast, we can actually bring anxiety in to us. And so the first thing we have to remember when we talk about remedy for anxiety is, in our lifestyle and even in our meditation, if we're meditating on vast expansiveness all the time, that can actually bring in more of this energy of ether and air into the system. And so when we meditate, particularly if we have an anxiety condition, it really is helpful to do forms of meditation that bring in more earth, right? Downward moving, grounded, a sense of being out of the head and into the body. And so if you're out there listening, I actually don't recommend that you do meditation that is just about watching your breath. I actually don't recommend that you do meditation that's all about focusing on the sensations of anxiety in your body, because that could actually make it worse. You've got to be in the mood for meditation, if you know what I mean. And what I do recommend is that you meditate on your bones, on your organs, on your muscle, on your bones, on these things that are going to bring in more of the sense of being at home in your body and at home on the planet. And so we're going to do a little bones meditation before we end, just a quickie. But in the Lineage of Love this month, we're going to do a longer version of Body Yantra. This is my trademark form of meditation that really does bring you into your body and into the bones and into this earth element in a way that can be very soothing to anxiety. So thinking about the goal here, not being to get rid of anxiety, but to beginning to identify with something other than your anxious self. And so what does this mean? It means that, and you guys, I know you're out there and you're totally getting this. Like when you are anxious, it is so easy to think about it as my anxiety. Or even like for me, it would be like, oh my God, I'm anxious. That phrase itself, I am anxious. What I'm doing there is I am identifying with, I am saying that I am anxiety. And you know, if you know me, or even if you listen to the podcast, or if you're my student, or you meet me for 5 seconds, you know there is so much more to my existence than being anxious. That is like a tiny part of who I am. Is it a part of my experience of being human? Hell yeah. Is it a really freaking hard part about it sometimes? Totally. But is it who I am? No way. And so the first step when you're feeling anxious is really, well, the first step is to not judge yourself at all and to cease the need to like not having it. In other words, to break that spell of like, oh my gosh, here it comes. I don't want it. And I have to stop it. And then the second stage or piece is to disidentify with it a little bit. This isn't this isn't me. This is something that is occurring in the field of the space that is me. So the first step, not to try to resist it. The second step is to disidentify it with it as like the end all be all of who you are. And what that brings in is this beautiful portal, guys, this pregnant portal through which you can ask the question, okay, then who am I? Because who I am is a vast, endless, infinite field of loving awareness. Who I am is this endless, vast field of kindness and compassion and magic and power and beauty. That is who I am. And I, according to all the traditions, I don't die. I do not die. Anxiety rises and falls like so much wave on the ocean. And who I am is actually the ocean itself. So the first step, not wanting it to be different. The second step, not becoming it, not letting it be who you are. The third step, which by the way, I don't have these written down, but let's just say the third step or the third way to start to unhook from it. And there's so many techniques that we're going to go into. But for today, just the third way is to not think that you are alone in it. To not think that it's all yours. We talked about our ancestral lineage in the last podcast. Sometimes when we feel anxious, we think, oh my gosh, this is mine. I created it. It's all up to me to get rid of it. And it's like, no, dude, like Do you know how many people on the planet right now are feeling the anxiety in the atmosphere? So some of this is yours, but some of this is just anxiety, capital A. This shit is floating in the ether sphere. And sometimes you just walk into it. So not becoming, not resisting it, not thinking that it is who you are. And then lastly, not thinking that you own all of it by yourself. There's a freedom in these practices of knowing that right now somebody out in the world is feeling it too. You aren't alone. All of us little creatures are running around with this in our system. How beautiful that we can share this pain and know that we aren't alone. And as you begin to do what I'm suggesting, you begin to enter into something called witness consciousness. That part of you that can watch it, can witness it with loving compassion, and therefore it can kind of start to open up some room. So, what anxiety does in the body from an Ayurvedic perspective is that it constricts you, it makes you small and hardens you, it makes you dry and brittle and cold. It starts to collapse what's called the rasa of the body, the sap, the juice, the unctuousness, the sort of childlike juiciness and spontaneity that makes us playful and curious and funny and, youthful and sexual and sensual. It starts to dry that up and collapse the bones in on themselves. And when that collapsing happens, that rasa, that sap, it dries out. And so a part of this process I just walked you through will start to open up some room for that sap, for that unctuousness to be there. And in that, you can start to really feel into the way that you aren't this anxiety. There's room for you to be this juicy, vast ocean that can watch herself. And in that moment, your hormones actually change. You actually become, you can feel it, right? You can feel you have a state change, you have a shift. I know for myself, if I just stop and do this process of just not resisting it, knowing that it's not all mine, knowing that it isn't me, and holding some loving, good mother space, some nurturing space around it, I start to get some room and I start to feel like there's some possibility and that there's some spaciousness in what can feel like a very, very constricting experience. So I have like 6 pages of notes that I'm going to teach in the Lineage of Love in January. If you struggle with anxiety at all, I really encourage you to join the Lineage of Love this month. It's $18 for a whole course on how to unhook your nervous system and your thought patterning from anxiety. So check out the link in the show notes. We're going to go deeply into that. I'm going to give you guys a couple of more long, lengthy practices on doing that. But so you can check that out in the show notes, but we're going to do that practice now. We'll do a Body Yantra practice so you can experience it firsthand right now. If you love this podcast, we would love it if you would subscribe and share it with somebody that you think might need it. You might know of somebody that's struggling with anxiety and stress and fear, and share our podcast with them, please. It's free. Subscribe, give us a review, give us 5 stars. It really helps people find us. And, my goal is like the more people that get out of this fear, survival, fight, flight, collapse, nervous system mindset, the more people that do that in the world, you guys, the less we're going to be in these yucky fight or flight political, socio-cultural states, right? I really feel like it's my responsibility to get myself out of it as much as I can and then help others. So share it with somebody. And we really appreciate it. Check out the links we'll put in the show notes for Lineage of Love and for Ayurveda School. And we can just all do our best to kind of support one another in getting out of these loops. All right, you guys. So to end, let's just do a quick little body yantra. Let's go in. Let's do it. Let's feel it. So come into a comfortable seat. And if you're driving while you're doing this podcast or walking, you can still do this with us. But if you are in a place where you can just sort of chill out, then go ahead and be still and close your eyes and just begin to sense into your bones. In particular, I want us to bring our awareness to our collarbones. And you can put your hands on your collarbones and just feel your collarbones. It takes the brain about 60 to 90 seconds to really map your bones in terms of finding them in time and space. And when our nervous system can find itself in time and space, it starts to orient. It starts to get the message that, oh, I'm in this room. And this room is very, very safe and loving and easeful, warm, peaceful. And I can go off high alert. Continue to just get the sense of the length of your collarbones. You can hold them, you can feel them. And just whatever rises, be it what you label anxiety or sadness, grief, depression, whatever arises. See if you could just meet it with this sense of, I don't have to fix you, and you're not bad and you're not wrong. And just sort of say yes to it. Like, yeah, I accept that you're here. And just notice what's here as you pay attention to your bones. And you can start to walk your attention. You can put your hands here and kind of give it a little tap if you want. You can find your jaw bones. And it doesn't matter which part of your jawbone. It can be all of it, or you can just find one part of your bone. And just let your awareness, you can hold your bones with your hands, or you can let your arms drop and just feel with your mind where your jaw is and get a sense of the length from one side, the left side, maybe to the right side of your jaw. Just get a sense for how long that is, like as if you could take a little mystical highlighter and highlight in your mind's eye the right jaw and the left jaw and the distance between them. And as you notice them, you'll notice sensation or thought, but you're also going to start to notice how your bones are shifting, and that will cause sensation. Just notice if you can sense your bones actually are very flexible and malleable, and they move all the time. With every thought you think, your bones react. Notice any thoughts or sensations that rise and just kind of accept them. I'm not trying to fix myself. You may have anxious thoughts or anxious feelings, and you can just also know that that's a part of you, not who you are. And then slowly let your mind drop down into your hips, and you can take your hands and put them on your hip bones. Any of your pelvic bones will do. And just get a sense for the left side of your pelvis and the right. And with that same magic highlighter, just highlight the distance between them and get a sense of where they are in your body. And find those bones and let yourself just rest into your bones. Letting whatever sensations or thoughts rise to the surface, and meet those thoughts and sensations with a sense of, yeah, you can definitely be here. It's cool. And you're just like this tiny part of who I am. And start to notice, well, who am I when I'm not just that thought and feeling? Who am I? And get a sense of that ocean consciousness, that bigger love field of who you are. Just a few more moments of meditating on the bones of your pelvis, the distance from the left and the right. Good. I hope that as you begin to slowly open your eyes and let your mind come back into the outer space as you maintain some of your awareness in your bones, I hope that you know that you can always come back to your body and your bones for the most powerful sense of grounding and rootedness comes from our relationship to our bones. And they truly are the element of the earth in our body. They are the antidote to the element of ether and air that is thoughts and feelings. These thoughts and feelings are subtle. They're always shifting and moving and changing, and especially thought, right? And so when we identify with thought, firstly, we identify with such a small part of us, but we also identify with the most etheric, changing aspect of who we are, and that's scary. We want to feel settled. And so begin to come into the home of the bones. I hope that this chat on anxiety and this topic has really been beneficial for you. I know that it's been imperfect, and I'm cool with that. Perfectly imperfect. I hope it's been helpful for you, and I hope that you can find peace today, dear listener. And I hope to see you in Shakti School in 2019. Enjoy this beautiful holiday.